Welcome to the live stream Q&A. Looks like we have a few people right off the bat. If you guys have any questions on writing or storytelling, feel free to drop them in the comments. How do you write a morally ambiguous main character? To write a morally ambiguous main character, so what you want to do is have the character have either good motivations and questionable methods, or have them have more selfish motivations that still lead them to do good things, but their motivations for doing it are kind of selfish. So, for example, a character could have really good motivations of that they want to get information out of somebody because that information is going to save the world. If they torture someone, that is a very morally ambiguous action, a very morally ambiguous method. Their intentions are good, but that's very morally ambiguous what they're doing to achieve it. Likewise, then on the other side of things, if you have a character who is doing good things, but they're doing it for selfish reasons, you could have somebody who is, let's say somebody sees someone being a thief, and they stop that person being a thief, but they're doing it because they're getting back at this person because they stole from them at one point. Like, that's not them being super virtuous. That's just them getting back at somebody. And there's a lot of like superheroes too. I think you could see them being kind of like that. Maybe they get a power high. Maybe they go after criminals not because they really have a sense of justice for the world, but because they really just love to feel a sense of power, which is messed up. So if you can mix either good motivations with questionable actions, or mix good actions with questionable motivations, that's how you get a morally ambiguous character. How do you push the plot forward? The way I like to push plots forward is I like to have characters act upon their emotions, give those actions consequences, which affect the plot, which then affect the character again. So basically, have your character do something that has consequences, and that can really help progress the plot forward. You can always bring in outside things to kind of launch the plot forward. For example, an alien invasion comes in, and of course that's jump-starting the plot. But it's always more interesting if your character does something to really initiate the events of the story, but also to cause the story to keep moving forward. Because when your character's actions have that influence, when it has those consequences, it makes their actions more interesting, more powerful, more dynamic, and it gives them agency. Is kind of the big thing. Your character is not just experiencing the story, they're driving the story forward, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. So if you're trying to move your plot forward, I would say look at what your character's emotions are, especially their core emotional drive, the thing they're struggling with emotionally, and then use that to drive their actions, and then give those actions consequences for the plot and for the character themselves. How do you go about executing time jumps? For time jumps, if you're going to skip a large portion of time, it's often good to do so when after a kind of a conclusive moment. Like, for example, you finished a bit of an arc, or reached kind of a pivotal moment in a character's arc, or you've concluded a particular event and it kind of has a sense of finality to it. That can be a great time to either start a new part of the novel or a new chapter and immediately start the next chapter with expressing how time has passed. So that's a very easy way to do it. Someone commented, I've avoided reading anything while writing my book series as I don't want to take too much. So you're saying you're afraid of taking too much from other series and letting it influence you too much. Please start reading again. Because the thing is, people get paranoid about having too much influence from the outside, but the thing is, your story is not going to be as good if you're not reading as you're writing, if you're not taking in outside influences and letting them come into your writing, because that's how you develop a style as a writer. If you write in a vacuum and you don't let other works influence you and other authors influence you, it's going to limit the creativity of your work, and because originality doesn't come from like this inner space that no one else can touch. Like, it's not like we pull it out from ourselves and that's originality, it's our own. Originality is the taking in of a wide variety of influences, spinning them together in new, fresh ways, and then combining who you are with it. Like, the inspirations and the sources that you read and the other things you read around you, like, those all help contribute to what makes your story original and what helps give it life. So I very much encourage you to start reading again, as much as you can, because it's gonna make your story stronger. It absolutely is, and it's gonna make it easier to write too, because you'll be seeing people solving problems in their stories, and you'll have an answer for it. For example, I'm currently revising a fantasy YA novel, and I just finished the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, that's how she did this world building, or oh, this is her power system and how she did here. I need something like that. And it's like I'm getting inspiration, I'm getting answers to questions I had, and reading is how you're going to solve the problems of your story and really breathe life into your story. So I really encourage you to read as you write. Are extensive descriptions in between lines of dialogue a good idea, or should they be quick? It depends on your scene and the pacing of the conversation. If the conversation is happening back and forth very quickly, then you don't want to have all these big descriptions, because what happens when you have a description in there is it basically feels like a pause. So if there's a pause that's quite long there, you can definitely put in descriptions that are quite longer, and it'll just feel like a pause in the conversation. But if it's supposed to be a back and forth kind of conversation, then it's going to feel really weird if you have that there. The other thing to keep in mind is when characters, when you have a lot of text between what one character says and then the other character's direct response, by the time you get through that description or that exposition and get back to the character's response, the reader will have forgotten what the previous character said, and so the response will feel out of place. And so if there's going to be like a question asked and then a response, or like someone making a play on the other one's words, you'll want those close together so that the original piece of dialogue is closer to the reader's mind when they get the payoff. But basically, you can have long descriptions between dialogue, but not if you're trying to have a quick conversation. Like, if you can do it if there's supposed to be kind of a long pause. What if you have 2 points of view, but only one of them is interesting? What's some easy filler that still helps? So don't think of it in terms of trying to add filler to the boring one to make it better. Think of it as when one point of view is interesting and the other is not, the one is probably interesting because there's tension there. There's conflict, things are happening. So what you need to do to make the other one more interesting is not just filling it in. What you want to do is create tension in there, create conflict. So look at that character and ask yourself, do they have a clear emotional drive? Do they have that insecurity, pain, desire, or misbelief about the world that's driving their actions, that's causing conflict in their plotline, in their point of view? Or are they kind of a weak character and there's just not much happening there? So we need to focus on is like, what do they want? What are some barriers I can add to create tension, or some internal struggles to create tension, and then look to those as ways to add tension to that other plot line, because that really is what makes things interesting. Tension is what makes something interesting, and the lack of tension is what makes something else boring. So that's what you'll want to look for. Can you make a good story without any prior writing experience? I would say probably not, because you shouldn't go into it expecting that you can. It's kind of like asking, can you paint a masterpiece when you've never painted before? Can you make a great film if you've never tried making a film before? It takes practice. It's a craft. You could try writing something and without any prior experience, and there's the possibility that despite all of the flaws that'll never really be there because you haven't honed your craft, that it could still spark something with somebody. You could still spark an emotional connection with some readers, but would it be a good story? Probably not if you've never written before, because it's not something you can just kind of one and done do. It is a lifelong pursuit that you're always trying to improve upon. And so I would say you can't write a good story on the first try if you've never written before, but that's just in terms of like what is kind of artistically amazing. But you can still write a good first story, like in terms of like having your expectations in a realistic place of what you can do. Because I don't think you should feel bad about your first stories. Like we always talk about how you have to try really hard over the years and practice and hone your craft, and you got to write a lot of crap before anything good comes out. I think that can be a slightly negative way of thinking about it. You can still write that first story, and there can still be good things in there. There can still be really exciting things. It doesn't have to all be bad. There's just going to be things you're not very good at yet because you've never tried writing before, and it's a craft that takes a long time to develop, just like any craft. And obviously some people are more naturally capable at it than others, but it still will always take time and will always be a process of improving. If you've never written before, though, I encourage you to just get started and like don't let yourself get too beaten up about the things you fail to do well in those first stories you write. Also focus on just the things you do enjoy about and the things you think you do well, whether it's a character you love that you've written, whether you're really proud of a line of dialogue or an image that you've created, a detail you've included. Like, take pride in those moments as you're writing. Don't let those initial stories be all negative for yourself, because you are doing some good things in there while you're still honing your craft. How can you become more creative and imaginative in your writing? Read a lot and read broadly. Read a lot of different types of authors. Don't get stuck with one style. Don't get stuck with one genre. See different things and try to combine them into your own writing. Bring in variety of influences. Is a great way to do it. Another great way to make your work more creative and more imaginative is to practice figurative language. I used to write very literal prose. No similes, no metaphors, but I kept reading writers who were just doing it so wonderfully, like is it Marcus Zusak who wrote the book Thief? Wonderful figurative language in that book, and Colin McCann in a variety of different books. His like Let the Great World Spin. His figurative language is just incredible, and it made me want to be more figurative in my writing. So what I actually started doing was I started practicing figurative language on my own with some exercises. Every few days I would describe a random action, like it could be frying eggs, it could be mowing the lawn, it could be anything. I would describe it as if it were a scene, but then I would do it literally with very literal language. But then I would take 5 minutes and I would just riff on making similes and metaphors out of it, and just trying to write about that thing in a very figurative way. And what I produced was terrible, and I would never use it. But what it did, it started getting me thinking in those ways, and started getting me comfortable with similes and metaphors. And then, of course, as I was actually doing my writing, I also pushed for it. I would write a description, and I would ask myself, try to come up with a simile or a metaphor. It doesn't need to be good. It's a first draft. Just get something down there. And so I got myself thinking about it more. And now it's a very natural part of how I write, and I don't have to think about it that much anymore because I spend so much time consciously pushing myself in that direction. And so that's what I encourage you to do, is read a wide variety of influences, because that's going to keep you creative. But then also practice figurative language in particular, because that can really help you start making some kind of instinctual gut connections between disparate ideas, and that's where a lot of creativity comes in. Should I save my greatest story ideas for later in life? I don't think so. I say no because I think we put way too much stock in the value of the idea we have, that we tend to forget that actually the idea itself, the starting idea, that starting point, isn't really the biggest determinant of whether it's a good story or not. What makes it a good story is how you execute it and how you bring it to life. And so when you hoard away your best ideas for later, all that does is prevent you from working with stories you're passionate about. And the best way to improve and the best way to enjoy your writing craft is to write stories you're excited about. So I would say use your best ideas now if you want. And if you finish them and they're not super satisfactory and you move on and years later you decide you want to take another crack at it, you absolutely can. For example, I never finished the full novel. I got like 120,000 words written of it, but it was kind of like a cyberspacey, post-apocalyptic story, and I didn't quite finish it, but I got close to finishing it, and someday I think I might come back to rewrite it. I might start from scratch, take the initial idea, and try and take it in a new direction. And I'm not disappointed having written it out originally. It was just one way to tackle it. No one's really seen it, so I don't really feel bad about rehashing it and trying something new. And so like I would have been really bummed and bored not working on the stories in the past if I had refrained from trying to write them in the past. So I very much encourage you to feel free to use your greatest ideas now, and if they really are still sticking with you later in life, you can always go back to them and rewrite them. And again, I really do want to emphasize that the success of a story and the quality of a story is much more determined by the execution than it is by the idea itself. Even like a very bland idea can create a wonderful story if you execute it well. One of my favorite novels growing up was Jumper by Stephen Gould. The movie's terrible, but the book is actually really good. I do have some trigger warnings for you for the first couple chapters, though. There's some abuse pretty clear that happens in it, but if you're okay with that, as a reader, I highly recommend reading it because it's a simple idea. The main character, Davy, is being abused by his father, and he discovers during one of those moments the ability to teleport. That's all. So he can teleport now, so he runs away from home. And it's a story about him dealing with his abuse and dealing with trying to end the cycle of abuse that's kind of in his family. And like it's a great story, but it's a simple idea. It's just a kid figures out he can teleport. And that's not a great idea. It's just an idea. But Stephen Gould did a wonderful job executing it. And so I encourage you also to keep that in mind, that it's more important for now that you enjoy yourself as you write and develop your skills And I say don't hold back. Always write the project you're most excited to work on, because that's going to make your writing life the most enjoyable. Greg869 says, you make me want to write. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. I love motivating people to write. It's one of the things that has made me really understand like just why I'm glad to still be doing this. It makes me want to keep doing these TikToks is I feel like if I am motivating people to write, then this is all worth it. Because sometimes I worry, I think it's easy to get stuck just only looking at writing tips, but then never going out and reading novels and practicing writing. And I worry sometimes that like the things that I create can be distractions from the act of writing, which is not something I want to be. I want to encourage you all to write and grow, and so to hear that these videos do help people actually feel motivated again to write really makes me happy. It makes me feel more confident about doing these things, because that really is what I want to help you all do, is to feel motivated to write your stories, and to write your stories as best you can, and write stories you can be happy with and have a happy writing life. All right, everybody, thank you so much for stopping by this live stream Q&A. I'll be posting the highlights on Thursday. Hope you all join me next week at Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time. Everyone have a good week. Talk to you later.